After e4, e5, knight c3, knight c6, black is playing the knight c6 game, and we play f4 anyway. So here black will have an option to either take the pawn or not. And we're gonna look at this in different videos. So in this video we're gonna go through pawn takes, and in the next videos we're gonna see what happens when the black player doesn't take the pawn. So after pawn takes, knight f3, and now a few things can happen. For example, d6 is the most popular move here. But let's see what happens if our opponent says, you know what, instead of d6 I'm gonna get the bishop out first, and then I'll play d6 afterwards for normal development. Let's see, bishop to b4, attacking the knight. How to deal with this? Bishop c5 is a waste of time, because the fact is that black doesn't have a pawn in e5 anymore. You can play d4, and you're gonna get too much control of the center. You're gonna go and take the pawn in f4, and this is just better for white. You'll see in a little bit more detail in another occasion. And bishop d6 doesn't work, because you can play e5 and then take the pawn for real. So let's not look at that. Let's look at bishop to b4 now. Okay, knight to d5, that's the move. And you're attacking the bishop. You want to take the bishop out from the opponent, and then you'll be able to just play d4, c3, attacking the knight, bishop takes in f4. It's a much better game for white. So let's see black saving the bishop. Bishop to c5. Okay, now we have an excuse to see d4, this type of move, right? We are supported by the knight and the queen. The bishop will have to move. Bishop b6. Fine, we take in f4. Let's go on with development. Now, knight f6 is bad because you can pin it. And you already have double attack here on f6, and our opponent doesn't have the dark square bishop on this side of the board, on the king side. Therefore, we're already winning this game. So that's a blunder. Knight g2 e7. Let's look at this. Now you may argue, doesn't bishop g5 do the same? Of course not, because black can play f6, because also the knight is protected by the knight, so black can even play h6. So, what to do now? Our opponent, it's black to move, and black plays knight g2 e7 in order to be able to castle. Okay, take the bishop. Pawn takes back. And now, yes, we have opened the file for the opponent rook, and we have given away a very good looking knight. However, our opponent was threatening to just take it. And then we take back, yes, but we double our pawns, and it's actually not bad. It's not bad of a position, but that's not our best move. And also we've removed the bishop pair from our opponent, and most importantly, we are now winning this game. d5. There's an attack on the knight. The knight will have to move. There's nowhere to go except b8. I mean, unless you want to go to a5, but then b4 traps the knight, or maybe b4, but then the knight will move again, and when you force the knight to move, he will have to go to a6, where he's not playing anymore. And yeah, after castling, the development of the white player is fantastic. Black has gone nowhere safe to castle. So let's see knight to b8 instead, with the idea of playing knight pawn to d6, develop the bishop, and then simply play knight d7, and then the knight goes maybe to c5. But now we're going to play d6, and that's a move that was going to happen anyway. So even if our opponent, instead of b8, had chosen b4, you'll play a3, and then the knight goes to a6, as mentioned, very bad square, and then you play d6. So let's look at the ideas here. d6 just, stops the development of this bishop forever. So let's see. Let's make an example. Let's go back to b8. This is the line we're looking at. But, I mean, the patterns are the same. Okay, knight b8, d6. Pawn takes, bishop takes. Castle, bishop to d3. It looks like this is not bad for black, because black will play rook e8, get the knight to play, and and play a normal game. But the thing is that this bishop, the light square bishop, is never going to play. So let's see now what to do. Okay, rook e8, castle, and now knight to g6. And the idea obviously here would be to play queen f6, maybe attack this bishop, but that bishop can be defended easily. So how is the black bishop going to develop this bishop, the bishop in the light square? Maybe he's going to play b5, he will lose the pawn. Maybe he's willing to lose the pawn, because then he's going to be able to play b6 and then bishop b7, and finally play. Let's see how the game will continue. Okay, after knight g6, bishop to c4, putting pressure on this square and exploiting the open file for the rook for a strong attack. It is now impossible to come back. There is no way to fix the game for the black player. Let's make an example. Black developing a move, right? Just so you understand what we're threatening here. Knight to g5, right? Easy. An attack on f7 by 3 pieces, so it doesn't matter. Even if you defend it with a rook, you can win the exchange, but you can also then play knight f7 anyway. And, you do what you want in this position. It's completely winning. The queen can't really take the knight, because bishop check, king moves, and then you take the rook. and it's obviously completely winning for white. So in this position, we tried this move, knight c6, just to make an example of what the plan is. The plan is knight g5. Now, according to the engine, the best move is knight to h8, but the position is still evaluated plus 550, some crazy number like that. And now, you see, even if black plays h6 to stop the knight from going to g5, you also have e5. Now, let me explain. e5 looks like it's attacked. So let's say here, if black plays knight to h8, best move by the engine, you play knight e5. And again, you have 3 attackers here. There's no coming back. You can even add another attacker, queen f3, later on. So black is completely paralyzed, and this bishop is not going to move from this amazing diagonal. So in this position, if black plays h6, you might argue, okay, you don't have knight g5, you don't have knight e5. Actually, you do have knight g5. That's a funny thing. Pawn takes knight, and now bishop f7 check. King can't move to f8, can't take the bishop because of the rook. We'll have to move on this side of the board, on the h file, and then you can come in with the queen. So let's make a recap, and we go through something. Okay, well, we're looking at f4 and pawn takes. That's the topic of the video. Knight f3, and we went through bishop b4. The attempt of quickly releasing the dark square bishop is bad. Knight f6 instead. Okay, bishop c4, very normal game. Some sort of Italian looking, but it's still a Vienna Gambit because you're just gonna castle on the open file. Let's go through development. Bishop e7. This move, for example, is immediately punished. e5, attacking the knight. The knight will have to move. There's nowhere to go except g8, but then you play d4. The bishop is going to f4. Castle, it's completely winning. The knight going to g8 is a joke. Let's look at this move, knight h5. Defending this pawn. Doesn't seem like we have much, but still, d4. Take full control of the center. And now d6. How to deal with this move? Well, it's too late for black to challenge the center, the control of the center, because we can play d5. And the knight will have to move, and we're completely winning. Now, you might say, I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. So you might say, okay, the knight can go to a5, or maybe even take the pawn. Okay, fine. If the knight takes the pawn, you take back. Pawn takes back, and then you miss the part where queen takes the knight completely for free in h5. So in this position, after d5, what if knight a5, attacking the bishop? Okay, bishop e2, save the bishop from the attack. You don't want to give up the bishop pair. Castle, this looks fine. b4, and the knight's under attack and it's trapped. You might argue, okay, then the opponent shouldn't have castled. He should have played, well, what? What can black do to save the knight? The only escape square is going to be b7, so he's going to have to play this move. Okay, well, in that case, you go on with castling. And after knight to b7, then eventually knight to c5 and bishop in fianchetto, everything looks fine. The thing is, you play bishop check, and now the king has lost the right to castle, unless he plays bishop d7. Okay, let's go through both of them. If king goes to f8, e6, and we're finalizing the attack on this pawn in f7. This king is completely exposed, is in huge trouble. What about a6, attacking a bishop? What are we going to do? Completely ignore everything. Ignore this pawn, ignore the bishop, just play knight to d4. But we have an attack on this knight, and then we're threatening checkmate. So if our opponent does take our bishop, then we play queen h5 check, threatening here. The rook is coming to f4. It's game over. So in this position, after e6, what if black says, you know what, I'll take your pawn, and let's carry on with this game. Still, you play knight d4, and after knight d4, you're releasing an attack on this knight. When the knight moves, you got attack on the square e6. But the best way to take is with the pawn. So now, how are we going to capitalize? I mean, position is like +6 or something like that. If black attacks our bishop, we play bishop c6, pinning the knight. And when black plays rook to b8, I'm pinning the knight, ready to play knight c5, get rid of this unbelievable bishop. It's just too late. You're going to play bishop f4, and this king is never going to castle. Okay, last move that we're going to look at in this line. Knight to c5, double attack now on the pawn in e6. Simply play queen e2. And now you have a plan of playing b4, which at the moment traps the knight. I mean, forces the knight back to b7 actually. So black to move. Let's look at bishop b7. Counter attacking on our piece. Okay, well, no, you take, and now you have deprived the knight of the only square to go to. So b4 now traps the knight. So that was not possible. Back in this position, after the check, we went through king f8. You might argue, what about bishop d7? Isn't this another way to block? Okay, the thematic e6 comes now. Then obviously, if he takes the pawn in e6, you can play knight d4, right? The same thematic release of attack on that knight. He will come with a check. He will be devastating. And here, what about, you might argue, okay, after we play e6, what if black takes the bishop? Now here, usually you will just take the pawn in f7 with check, and the king is exposed. But the best move is knight to b5, and this knight is fantastic. It cannot be removed, let's say a6, because then you have access to d4 from where the knight is sitting to the right of the father. But the funny thing is that the best move is knight f to d4, ignoring this knight, because taking this knight in h5 is just the best thing that you can possibly do. So let's make a recap. We understand this line better. Knight c6, f4. We're looking at pawn takes, knight f3, and the early knight f6. Okay, bishop c4, and then bishop e7, right? Developing move. How to punish this? Okay, you attack the knight, and when the knight moves to h5, d4, d6, challenging the center. Too late, you play d5. Now, in the line with knight to a5, we said we're going to play bishop e2, and now we saw the whole variation with b7, b6, with the knight not getting trapped. But let's look at this line that I was mentioning before. This is a bit crazy. After castling and b4, the knight is trapped, but black can try to find some compensation with pawn takes in e5. Okay, now the best move is not to take, but rather rook to b1. The knight is still trapped, and we're preventing the bishop from going to this square, which would have been annoying. Okay, f5 by black. This is now, okay, it's a crazy line, but like it makes sense to play it. Pawn takes knight, and now bishop to c5, stopping us from castling. How to continue? d6. Crazy pawn sacrifice. Could be taken in three different ways. Obviously, if black takes with the bishop, then you can castle. If with the queen, then you can trade pieces and go to a winning endgame. So after black takes with the pawn, a6. So let's make an example. Rook to b8. Just make an example. Queen check. King moves, and then pawn takes in b7, and it's completely winning for white, obviously, as you can see. So instead of rook b8, what if bishop e6? Oh, okay, you might argue, what about taking this pawn? No, because queen d5 check wins the rook. And b6 obviously is wrong for the same reason. Queen d5 check. So what if our opponent plays bishop e6, stopping us from doing that? Okay, take this one. Rook b8, knight a4. Threatening to take the bishop pair. Remember, we're up a piece. Queen a5 check. c3. And now rook to f7. Let's look at this. What if, you might argue, what if knight to f6, trying to get back into the game? No, because rook b5 attacks the queen will have to move. And when the queen does move, you take this this bishop, and after taking back, you're now simplifying and winning this endgame. Besides, you're able to castle. So in this position, rook f7, the idea of maybe doubling up, doesn't work because you can play knight g5. Okay, the rook goes to e7, take, and now there's the attack on the knight is released. So that was just an idea to show how badly our opponent pieces are placed. Okay, so let's just make a quick mention before we go and change topic about, okay, pawn takes knight f3, and now the early knight f6 variation. Okay, bishop c4, and now let's look at d6. d6, instead of playing bishop e7 straight away, d6 first in order to stop the d4 e5 pawn push. So the black player puts a pawn to control the square e5 in order not to get crushed. That's definitely better. Okay, d4 for white, bishop e7, bishop recaptures. And here the game goes on very simple. They're all moves that will happen, right? They're all natural. Castle, okay, queen e2, we want to castle alongside. Put the rook on the same file as the opponent queen, because remember, the e5 push is going to happen no matter what, and it's unstoppable. It cannot be stopped. Remember, d5 cannot happen because you got, triple attack over that square. But you gotta castle as soon as possible. Okay, let's look at this move. Bishop g4 seems to be making sense. Attacking the bishop, pinning the knight, so in order to prepare knight d4. Obviously here you just castle long. And now let's look at this idea, a6, with the idea of playing b5, b4, and pushing on the queen side. It's the only plan that makes sense for black to do. There's nothing else that black can do. Okay, well, h3, attack the bishop. And now two options we're going to look at. We're just briefly mentioning this. Bishop takes or bishop moves back. Either way, we have a much better game. So if bishop takes, queen takes, we're just already winning, because now we're threatening e5. Let's make an example. b5 with an attack on the bishop, we won. Game over. e5. The reason is simple. There's an attack on this knight and there's also an attack on this knight. Now you may argue our opponent can take our bishop, but remember that we still have an attack on this knight. But first, if we take the knight in f6, it comes with an attack on the bishop. So it's Zug. So if they take our bishop, we take their knight, equal material. But then there's going to be a pawn attacking the bishop in f7, just like there's going to be in e7, and just like there's going to be still an attack on the knight in c6. So that wins material. So in this position, after h3, what if the bishop goes back instead? Alright, g4. The bishop will have to move. e5 is coming no matter what. If pawn takes, we can take back. And then there's an attack on the queen and the pawn is attacking the knight. So that's not, obviously that wins on the spot. Knight to e8 puts more protection over d6. But it's just too late because you're going to play h4. Now remember, h5 traps the bishop. So the bishop will have to play h6. You play h5 anyway. The bishop goes back. And now let's close the line after rook h2 g1. We obviously are going to play g5. Take the pawn in h6. We have a lot of attack over that square. So we have enough attack. We're opening the files. Position has been evaluated around +3 for a while in both variations. Obviously, this doesn't have to necessarily go like this, but the opponent will have to play like an engine. I'm exposing all of the mistakes then that arise out of moves that look completely natural. But I also go through all the opponent playing top engine moves. So if you stick around there, you learn what to do also in those cases. So let's make a recap. Let's look at something else. f4, pawn takes, knight f3. Now, if black plays d5, straight away we play d4. And now there's loads of options that might be seen, but look, you gotta learn the position. So if black plays knight with 6, right, this is a transposition from what we've seen before. We're just gonna play the usual moves. You play bishop takes in f4, and if the bishop, the bishop will go to e7. If black played d6, that means the bishop will go to e7, and then bishop c4 and castle, and it's exactly the same position as before. You play queen e2, long castle, blah blah blah. So obviously you gotta work that out. And in this position, after playing d4, if black plays bishop e7, right, here you just go and take this pawn, and after knight f6, there you go, transposition. So you just gotta learn the patterns, not memorize the moves. So once you've seen the position before, then you can tell what's going on. So again, in this position, after playing d4, the novelty will be the following. So after knight f6 now, okay, take this one, and now let's look at bishop to d7. You can say, okay, well, nothing's gonna change. You can play bishop c4 and then black plays bishop e7. Well, something has changed. What changed is that the black bishop is not committed to go and pinning this knight, but rather just play the very passive variation with bishop d7. How do we deal with this? Okay, queen e2, surprisingly. Bishop e7, castle long, castle e5. So remember, when the bishop stays in d7, you want to play queen to e2 straight away, because you don't have anywhere to go for this bishop, the light square bishop. You don't really want to go to b5, because the knight is defended by a bishop, and it's just a complete waste of time. You're allowing black to play a6, b5 with a tempo, and then b4. So don't do that. Take is not good, obviously. So the knight will have to move again, and then we will have a deadly pin on this bishop d7. That's how we're punishing this bishop d7 move. So after knight to e8, okay, h3. Obviously now a move like f5 to try and up g4 from coming is met with h4. Winning move, because we're going to be playing knight to g5 and infiltrating our queen. And this is the type of knight that doesn't even care about being attacked by h6 or taken, because after the pawn takes back, this rook will cooperate perfectly with our queen. So a move like f5 to stop g4 is not good. Let's look at this move, queen to c8, to stop the arrival of our pawns. Well, okay, queen e3 is the best move. What about taking the pawn now? Is it possible? Okay, no, take back. Okay, let's look at f6. Does this move trade with our fantastic center? No, that's not going to work, because bishop c4 check. Now, if the king moves, then e6 traps the bishop. And if instead black plays bishop to e6 to trade with our bishop, now we take this pawn. And now there's double attack on this bishop, so we're winning a piece. Unless our opponent takes our bishop in c4 first. But now you're going to take this bishop in e7, and that comes with an attack on this rook. So this will have to be taken back. Knight takes in e7, queen e4 with an attack on this bishop. This knight in e7 is not free because the rook is attacking the bishop in f4. So let's look at this move. Queen e6. Okay, well, you ignore everything and you just take the pawn in b7 and you're attacking the rook. So if rook takes your bishop, you can take the opponent rook. If black plays knight to d6 to attack the queen and protect and allow the rooks to protect each other, simply queen takes in c7 is the best move. And obviously the rook does attack this bishop, it's true, but you're attacking this knight. So that's not working. What if instead our opponent, instead of knight d6, he played queen to c6? Desperate for trading. Okay, well, we gave it to him because after take, then we play bishop to g3, but we're going to finish the game with an extra pawn, a much better development and possibility to infiltrate in the opponent rank, 7 rank.